Ray, these are scary times.
I know, they always are. What are you referring to specifically?
Well, Russia's war with the Ukraine is pretty frightening.
Right.
There's talk of Russia potentially using nuclear weapons against the people of Ukraine or even other countries. It's awful watching helplessly from afar.
I get that. I mean, lately it feels like we're on the edge of World War III.
Yeah.
But I don't suppose we came to the southern Rhode Island town of Wood River Junction to talk about nuclear war.
No, we came to the small town of Wood River Junction to talk about nuclear meltdown.
What do you mean?
Wood River Junction has the unfortunate distinction of being the site of the nation's first fatality due to acute radiation syndrome. Hi, I'm Jeff Belanger, and welcome to episode 245 of the New England Legends podcast. If you give us about 15 minutes, we'll give you something strange to talk about today.
And I'm Ray Auger. Thanks for joining us on our mission to chronicle every legend in New England, one story at a time. From weird history to strange haunts to out-of-this-world encounters, we explore the stories that have left a permanent mark on our region. We're glad you're riding along with us. We're a community, and we count on you to help spread the word about what we do. Great things happen when you share these stories. We connect.
Now, before we grab our Geiger counters and go looking for nuclear fallout in Wood River Junction, Rhode Island, we want to take just a minute to tell you about our sponsor, Nuwadi Herbals.
Now, Jeff, have you ever had one of those weekends where you maybe had one too many drinks, maybe too much junk food, too many sweets?
You know, Ray, I rarely don't have weekends like that.
Well, come Monday, I turned to Toxaway Tea by Nuwadi Herbals. Toxaway Tea has a blend of green tea leaf, fennel seeds, orange peel granules, rhubarb root, ginger root, juniper berries, and so many other herbs and other all-natural ingredients that help me cleanse from the inside and get back on a healthy track.
And since we're cleaning out, I also reach for Nuwadi Herbals Calming the Storm Tea. Like Toxaway, and really all their other teas and products, these all-natural ingredients help get my stomach and guts back on track after an overindulgent night or weekend.
Not only do these teas taste great and make you feel good, I love saving money making these warm treats at home instead of hitting the drive-thru for those expensive, over-sugared coffees.
Let Nuwadi Herbals help support your healthy lifestyle. Check out the Nuwadi Herbals website to see all their great products, and you get 20% off your order when you use the promo code LEGENDS20 at checkout. Visit nuwadiherbals.com. That's Nuwati Herbals with an S.com.
All right, Jeff, so you're telling me there was a nuclear disaster in Rhode Island?
There was, and it included a fatality.
Now, how could I have never heard of this before?
I think it's just one of those stories that's been almost lost.
I mean, usually nuclear disasters make international headlines. We don't forget that.
Right, true.
I know America has the 3 Mile Island disaster.
Yep, that was Middletown, Pennsylvania, 1979.
There was Fukushima in Japan a few years ago.
Yeah, that was 2011 when a tsunami took out the power supply to the plant and triggered a meltdown.
Then there's the Chernobyl disaster.
And that was the worst of all. Back in 1986, it happened in the Ukraine, back when that country was still part of the Soviet Union.
And there was a nuclear accident in Rhode Island, too?
Yeah, there was. So grab your radiation suit, Ray. We're going back to the summer of 1964.
It's Friday, July 24th, 1964, here in Wood River Junction, Rhode Island. Lyndon B. Johnson is president of the United States. The space race with Russia is in full swing, with each country sending up rockets and satellites. It's a time of innovation. In fact, one could argue the two hottest industries to work in right now are the space program and the nuclear program.
Nuclear energy holds quite a promise. I mean, using nuclear reactors, an enormous amount of energy is produced, and the only emission from the huge stacks is steam. No pollution, just clean energy.
Now, of course, there's the nuclear waste, but if handled correctly, there shouldn't be a problem.
The space race also includes a new kind of weapon, intercontinental ballistic missiles. ICBMs. These rockets can carry a nuclear weapon thousands of miles from one continent to another and kill untold amounts of people really quickly.
Like we said, an exciting time.
It is. People like 37-year-old Robert Peabody of Charlestown, Rhode Island, know working in the nuclear industry can offer him the kind of advancement and income he needs to provide for his wife and 9 children. His oldest is 16. His youngest is just 6 months. In fact, next week, 2 of his kids have birthdays.
Peabody works during the day as an auto mechanic, and he works as a production operator from 4 p.m. to midnight at the United Nuclear Corporation Fuels Recovery Plant in Wood River Junction. It's only a 5-minute commute from his home.
Now, a little more about the United Nuclear Corporation Fuels Recovery Plant. This building's located on 1,200 acres of land, bordered by the Pawcatuck River, and using the latest technology, the plant processes uranium scrap from either spent fuel rods from reactors or from other nuclear manufacturing processes. And it runs them through a series of processes to kind of recover the enriched uranium that can be used again.
The facility opened about 4 months ago, and it's important to note that there's no nuclear reactor here. It's mostly an assembly line where the spent fuel rods and other materials go through a chemical process over and over until what's left is waste, the chemical solution, and the enriched uranium.
Seeing this factory in action is actually not very interesting. I mean, it almost looks like some kind of bottling facility. But then you have to remind yourself that some of this stuff is highly radioactive material. The stakes are higher. If a spill happens, people can get hurt and even die.
It doesn't take many workers to run the assembly line here. There's a security guard to make sure no materials leave the building that aren't supposed to, and only authorized personnel enter. There are 2 other plant technicians besides Peabody. Then there's the supervisor. Those are the only people here for this Friday evening shift.
Everyone's been on edge this week, too. 2 days ago, Peabody was washing equipment on the 2nd floor when a radiation alarm sounded. He and 4 other people working that night ran out of the building as they're supposed to. Outside, they waited, but no other alarms went off, which means either the radiation problem was highly contained or it was some kind of false alarm. They grabbed their Geiger counters and soon learned there was no radiation at all. Water had splashed on one of the electrical contacts related to the alarm, and that's what set it off.
Then last night there was another problem. Some kind of black goo began appearing near the end of the processing line. It's some kind of organic compound. It's not triggering any radiation alarms, but it is gumming up the works. Last night they had to shut down the entire plant and clean out all the lines.
So now they have various containers, each holding liquid that's radioactive to varying degrees. Some of the containers are barely radioactive, others are highly radioactive. It all depends on which part of the process they were taken from. Tonight's objective is to get them all back on track through the chemical scrubbing process.
Each of the bottles is labeled to identify the contents, and the labels are held on with rubber bands because not too much sticks to these bottles.
The bottles that hold the radioactive liquid are 11 liters, 5-inch diameter bottles that are almost 4 feet long. Now, the containers have to be stored away from each other because if they're too close, the radioactive material can react through the plastic. If too much of the highly concentrated uranium was in the same container, say a larger one, it could create an uncontrolled atomic reaction called a nuclear excursion.
Nuclear excursion. That sounds like some kind of futuristic side trip.
It does, but not one you would ever want to take. So picture a mini nuclear meltdown with radioactive material splashing everywhere. Touch it, get too close, breathe in the vapors, and you die a horrible death.
So this is the kind of job you have to take seriously.
You do. Your own life and that of your coworkers depends on it. Arguably, the lives of people in nearby towns could depend on it, too. So there are processes and controls in place to make sure the job is as safe as possible. One of the processes involves scrubbing the uranium with trichloroethane, which is common dry cleaning solution. You put this chemical in the 11-liter container with the uranium, then you add in sodium carbonate. The whole thing weighs about 35 pounds. And then you shake the whole thing up.
Wait a minute, shake it?
Shake it for 20 minutes.
Well, isn't that dangerous?
I know it sounds scary, but this is the lower level radioactive material. And what happens is the trichloroethane scrubs the uranium of oils and grime, and then the uranium bonds with the sodium carbonate. After the shake, the sodium carbonate and uranium sinks to the bottom of the container, the oils and grime floats to the top, and the middle is the cleaning solution.
Now, even if it's safe, shaking something that weighs 35 pounds for 20 minutes isn't easy.
No, it's not. But earlier this week, another worker came up with an idea of pouring this mixture into a stainless steel mixer they have on the 3rd floor. It basically looks like a giant milkshake machine. You can pour the mixture in there and then let the machine do the work.
The supervisor on duty oversaw the operation earlier this week. He figured they're using low radioactive materials anyway, so there's little danger. Another supervisor on another shift protested, but he was talked out of his objections. Using the large stainless steel mixer is deemed safe, and it makes the job a lot easier.
So Robert Peabody and his coworkers have to clear out these large 11-liter containers from the stoppage last night. There's many to get through, so Robert grabs one of the containers holding bright yellow liquid, and he carries it up to the third-floor mixer. Peabody adds some sodium carbonate solution into the mixer, and he's turning on the machine.
Okay, Robert is removing the lid from the container of the bright yellow liquid. And now he's lifting the 35-pound container. He's resting the top part on his forearm so he can pour the contents into the mixer. Okay, the liquid is dumping into the mixer. Something's wrong.
That's not right. Oh, man.
Can't be good.
So the liquid in the mixer is glowing a strange bluish color.
That blue liquid is shooting out of the mixer. It's hitting the ceiling.
Robert just dropped the container into the mixer. He's fallen over backwards on the floor. Those bells are radiation warnings. This is no false alarm.
Robert is leaping to his feet and running for the door. He knows what just happened. The mixture in the vat just went critical, which means he just poured the wrong bottle into the mixer. He must have grabbed a bottle of the highly concentrated uranium mixture instead of the low-level container. Robert is running for the door as fast as he can, but he's also aware that he's a dead man. Robert is tearing off his clothes as he sprints towards the facility's emergency shack 450 feet away from the building.
His coworkers are close behind him now. They heard the alarms, and now they see that Robert's tearing his clothes off and running. They know this is no drill. Something terrible has just happened.
Robert is naked by the time he reaches the emergency shack. Some of the radioactive material was on his clothes, and though he knows it's already too late, he stripped them off as quickly as he could. Now lying on the floor of the shack, he's vomiting, and he's starting to bleed from his nose and ears.
Oh, this is awful. His coworkers are covering him with a blanket. It's 7 p.m. when the ambulance arrives. Robert's taken to Westerly Hospital first, but they have nothing in place to treat someone poisoned by radiation. So he's brought to Rhode Island Hospital in Providence. It's 7:45 when they arrive.
Robert Peabody is in bad shape. He's violently sick. His body is cramping from the radiation. And though Rhode Island Hospital is the best equipped in the region, it's not like they see this kind of injury every day. Hospital staff scramble to create an isolated room within the hospital.
Robert's wife and oldest son are summoned to the hospital by state police. They're only allowed to stand at the foot of his bed, and only for a few minutes because his entire body is radioactive. Robert tells his son that someone put a bottle of uranium where it wasn't supposed to be.
And now Robert's left hand is swelling up like a balloon. That was the hand that was directly exposed to the radioactive liquid. Doctors saw off his wedding ring before it ruptures his skin. A Geiger counter brought to the hospital reveals that Robert's wedding ring is now highly radioactive and must be disposed of.
Doctors have no way to treat Robert's radiation poisoning. They can only try to manage his pain and symptoms. It's Sunday morning when it becomes clear that his body is shutting down. He's dying at the cellular level. No visitors have been allowed to see him since Friday night. His body is so badly contaminated that he's going to have to die alone. By Sunday evening, Robert passes away. And that brings us back to today.
What a tragic experience. It's heartbreaking.
It is. After Robert Peabody was brought to the hospital, his coworkers went back inside wearing protective gear and carrying Geiger counters to contain the spill. Now, the mixer on the third floor was still running, but it was stable. However, once they turned it off, the material that had been spun to the sides of the container started to slide down to the bottom, causing a second nuclear excursion.
Thankfully, this was a smaller reaction than the earlier one, and the men were able to get out before they were contaminated. But consider this. Some of them had coins in their pocket. You know, some loose change.
Sure.
Those coins are now radioactive because the metal had absorbed the radiation.
Oh, that's amazing and so scary. And what a terrible event. The best they can figure as to what went wrong is that each container of material had a label on it held by a rubber band. And the best guess is that the label from the lower level radioactive material was mistakenly placed on the highly radioactive material, and Robert Peabody grabbed the mislabeled container by mistake and carried it up to the mixer.
As for a settlement, the Peabody family received $22,000 from the United Nuclear Corporation Fuels Recovery Plan. Not much considering Robert had a wife and 9 children.
Ugh.
Weeks after her husband's death, Anna Peabody was given what she was told were her husband's ashes. But she didn't believe it. She believes her husband's body was taken away for studying somewhere.
The Atomic Energy Commission eventually found the company in violation of 14 safety regulations. Now, the Wood River Junction plant was shut down for decontamination, but reopened in February of 1965, and the plant ultimately closed for good in 1980.
The Nuclear Regulatory Commission considers Robert Peabody the U.S. nuclear industry's first and last fatality due to acute radiation syndrome.
And due to fears of accidents and meltdowns, combined with cheap oil, the nuclear industry sort of ground to a halt in the 1980s. I mean, the promise was great, but when something goes wrong, the downside of a nuclear disaster is catastrophic.
Radiation poisoning seems like it would be the worst death imaginable, doesn't it?
It does, which makes the threat of nuclear weapons that much more frightening.
And that brings us to After the Legend, where Jeff and I take a deeper dive into what these stories mean. After the Legend is brought to you by our Patreon patrons.
This legendary group of people are in the inner circle. They help us out with our hosting, production, and marketing costs. Basically, everything it takes to bring you a new story each week.
For just $3 per month, you'll get early access to new episodes, plus bonus episodes and content that no one else gets to hear. Just head over to patreon.com/New England Legends to sign up.
Please do. So one of the reasons the nuclear industry faces so many challenges is stories like these.
Absolutely.
I mean, 3 Mile Island really was the beginning of the end of people's support for nuclear energy. Robert Peabody was a tragic case, of course, but then you also have to think of something else. So this plant in Rhode Island, out in the remote part of the state, took spent fuel rods from reactors and things like that. Well, those rods had to get to the plant.
Oh, sure. So
right.
they're traveling.
Right.
Yeah.
So they're on trucks and train cars and all kinds of things coming from all over the nation, right? And so what happens if, say, that truck carrying those spent fuel rods has an accident in your front yard where your kids are playing?
And these hospitals in Rhode Island weren't prepared for this. So was there preparation on those routes?
So here,
if that hospital wasn't ready, were other hospitals ready?
Let me make you feel entirely worse, right? There's still no treatment for acute radiation. So if you were irradiated right now, you could go to the hospital and they would isolate you and they would try to keep you comfortable. But there's no fix, right? You can't unradiate someone.
And what about cleanup? I mean, with those trucks.
That's right.
Are there preparations for that?
And this is the problem, right? So nuclear energy is clean. If there's a plant and it's operating correctly, it's just steam coming out of there. No pollutants, nothing.
Right.
But storing the spent fuel rods, dealing with that waste, that stuff sticks around for thousands of years.
That's the danger.
That's the danger. And that could contaminate everything. And it's like dropping a nuke if that stuff spills everywhere, right?
And we're probably not aware of these trucks and trains passing by our houses.
Darn right. They probably have like logos on them like wait a minute.
Mac and cheese. It's a whole train full of mac and cheese.
Well, I don't know.
We're going to the supermarkets, that's all.
No one's going to rob a truck full of mac and cheese, right?
Well.
So, do you remember, it was 1983, because I did have to look this up, The Day After.
Oh, absolutely.
Jason Robards, Steve Guttenberg, not in a Police Academy movie, John Lithgow and others. It sort of depicted what happens in a nuclear war.
I want to say we watched it in school.
Oh, yeah.
And it was terrifying.
Absolutely.
I had nightmares. I still do, because the vision of what a war would do. Like that cloud and you turn into a skeleton, right? It just blows everything off of you.
You would almost hope to be close to the epicenter.
I always think that.
Yeah.
If it's going to happen, please let it happen right over my head or right on my front yard.
Those of us that don't live near military targets or cities, we would have it worse.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, we may survive.
For a
little while, at least,
and die a horrible death and watch our children bleed out of the nose and ears and vomit and know that, that's where Robert Peabody was. And, it's so, I remember that movie. That was back when Russia was the enemy.
Yep. Scary times.
They are again, right?
I know, and there's threat of this.
We went a long, long way with them being like, they're part of the world now. We're all going to be good neighbors and mutual assured destruction. That's why no one will ever launch a nuke, because that would just be the end of you end yourself as quickly as the other people, right?
Sure.
Well, if you launch the first nuke, you live 30 minutes more, right? Like, who cares? And so, it's really scary. And so I think about our kids who didn't grow up watching all these shows and movies and it's just it's so frightening to me, especially when world leaders are threatening it. But that movie, The Day After, that was awful.
Yeah.
Everything was sad and got sadder. It started sad.
It's no happy ending.
Yeah, and it was just like if you could plot it on a graph, you're like it starts in a really sad place and then it's a downward slope to total despair, horrific horribleness. And I think the point, right, which is what great art does, is it's supposed to scare you.
Sure.
Like, hey,
make you think.
Young children, you're going to grow up in this world and maybe you're going to be a decision maker one day with your finger on the button.
Yeah.
Don't push it.
Right.
Right? Remember,
use some common sense. We're all in this together. You know, I may slap you, but you're going to slap me right back.
Right. But let's not pull out the big guns.
Yeah.
The ones that don't just kill you, they kill everyone around you.
Right.
So yeah, truly scary and horrible. And so we have a whole generation that grew up without those fears. Our parents, this is the funniest thing ever. You remember seeing the black and white films where the drills in school?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
What do the kids do when there's a nuke? They hide under the desk. Are you kidding me?
There's no walls on the desk either. It's just you got something over your head. That's it.
Yeah, here comes the nuclear cloud. And you're going to survive like 0.7 seconds longer because you were under the desk, right? But you're still going to get vaporized.
You're heavier than that desk is. The desk is not going to keep you from flying away.
No. So, but it was something, right? It was the illusion of we have a plan.
Give you a little hope.
We have a plan.
Yeah.
Oh, big flash on the horizon. Everybody, remember the training under your desk. Right, and you're gone.
Yeah.
So our parents grew up with that. We grew up with the real threat of Russia, and everybody has so many nukes to blow up the world 10 times over, right? And then Gorbachev comes along, and we had this hope, right?
Yep.
Reagan and Gorbachev sort of worked it out, and Russia's going to become part of the world now. And I remember when I was in high school, a bunch of kids from chorus in Russia came over and stayed with us for like a week. Yeah, and they sang, and we gave them standing ovations, and it was just so cool. Like it just felt like all those walls were coming down.
Fast forward to today, and they weren't even allowed to run in the Boston Marathon.
Right. Yeah, and so like all the McDonald's showed up over in Russia, and then another McDonald's, and then tons of other things. And we're like, all right, we're all one big global community now. And now it feels like those walls that came down over years and everything else are quickly being put back up. This horrific thing's happening in Ukraine, and they're threatening to use nukes. What happened?
David Hasselhoff was there when the wall came down. And I think Hoff is our only hope.
He might
the Hoff
be.
is our only hope. Him and the Goot. I think Gutenberg needs to come back.
Yeah.
And Hoff, I think the two of them, it sounds like a great buddy movie. with a happy ending.
The day after.
Where we sent the Goot and the Hoff
start writing this down. The Goot and the Hoff to I hope so, because man, it's scary. Also, there was this is not the first radioactive story that we've covered. Remember?
I remember.
It was 154.
That was a long time ago.
I know. I had to look it up. It was radioactive oatmeal.
Oh yeah.
At the Fernald School in Waltham, Massachusetts, in 1945. The school was feeding radioactive oatmeal to some of the boys as a test. Not a high dose, but just enough to see, like, well, what happens if you eat irradiated, foods, and
seems safe enough.
Yeah, they're like,
no lawsuits involved there.
No, this was before lawsuits. 1945, there were
the
no
good
lawsuits.
Old days.
Yeah, that was back when you couldn't sue anybody. So it was heavily on everyone's mind.
Yeah.
Well, what does it look like if we live on nuclear fallout? And even from those little tiny doses in oatmeal, they learned it's not good.
No,
like let's not ever do this. So yeah, no, scary times, and scary that it scares me that I never knew this story until
this one. Never heard of it. No.
I know, and someone died in Rhode Island. Just trying to, do the job, and it was a mistake. It was an accident. It was just, it was a horrible accident.
Everyone meant well,
right? But it's one of those things where you're like, this is how important this job is.
Right?
That, like you put the wrong label on something, and someone died.
Yeah, probably making minimum wage too.
Probably not a lot of money. No, I get it. I get it for sure.
Well, we'd like to thank our sponsor, Nuati Herbals. We'd like to thank our Patreon patrons. And our theme music is by John Judd.
Until next time, remember,
the bazaar is closer than you think.
It is.